All right, let's dive into something most Imperial citizens will never even hear whispers of, because if they did, it would already be too late for them. We're not talking about frontline battles or grand crusades. This isn't about the glory of Space Marines or the endless war against Xenos. No, this is about a war behind the war. A quiet, methodical, and devastating struggle waged not on open battlefields, but in the hidden corridors of power, in the shadows of the Emperor's own sanctum, and sometimes within the human soul itself. It's the war of the Custodes, the Sisters of Silence, and the Inquisition, a war that doesn't seek medals or monuments because its greatest victories must remain unknown. The Custodes, golden giants who don't just protect the Emperor, they embody his will. They're not Astartes, not even close. These aren't mass-produced warriors bred for planetary assault. Each custodian is a singular creation, personally crafted to be the perfect instrument of vigilance and judgment. But they don't act alone. The Sisters of Silence move without a sound, cloaked in an eerie stillness that gnaws at your mind. Their very presence silences the warp, creating a psychic void so absolute it makes psychers retch and scream. They are feared, even among allies, because where they go, light and clarity are replaced with dread and cold logic. And then there's the Inquisition, arguably the most terrifying institution in the Imperium. Not because they are the most powerful, though they often are, but because their authority is absolute. No one is beyond their gaze. No one is above their suspicion. And when they speak, even the mightiest bow or burn. So why are these three forces, so different in nature and origin, intertwined? Why do the Emperor's golden sons walk alongside voiceless null maidens and secretive inquisitors? It's not out of ceremony. It's not politics. It's survival. Because the threats they face are not just hidden. They are forbidden. And only together can they hope to contain them. There's a reason this triumvirate exists. The Imperium cannot afford to speak of the things they fight. These aren't just chaos incursions or Xenos infiltrations. These are nightmares made manifest, demonic intelligences that whisper into the minds of High Lords, ancient artifacts that rewrite causality, living weapons bred in lost ages, and secrets buried so deep beneath the throne that even the Adeptus Mechanicus dare not dig. And so, the Emperor's Legion isn't a chapter or a formalized division. It's a mythic alignment of forces, bound by necessity rather than protocol. When the Imperium's survival hinges on actions that can never be recorded, these are the warriors who answer. Not with glory, not with banners, but with silence, precision, and terrifying efficiency. In the coming parts, we'll peel back the layers of this clandestine alliance. We'll look into the hearts of the Custodes, trace the path of the Sisters of Silence, and uncover the motives behind the Inquisition's darkest operations. You'll see how their missions intertwine, conflict, and sometimes clash. And maybe, just maybe, you'll begin to understand why the greatest war in the Imperium is the one it never admits exists. Because in the 41st millennium, there is only war, but the most important battles are the ones no one dares to speak about. The Adeptus Custodes aren't just different from the Space Marines. They make them look like clumsy children playing at war. And I don't mean that as hyperbole. There's a kind of myth that circulates among fans, this romanticized view that Space Marines are the ultimate defenders of humanity. But once you start peeling back the layers and truly understand what the Custodians are, that illusion starts to crack. The Custodes are not part of the Imperium in the way the Astartes are. They were never meant to be. They stand apart not just by design but by purpose. While the Adeptus Astartes were created to lead armies and win wars, the Custodes were made for one singular task: to defend the Emperor. Not Terra, not the Imperium, not mankind, just him. Just each Custodian is a masterpiece of bioengineering, individually crafted, refined, and honed to such perfection that they can be considered post-human gods. While Space Marines are forged in the thousands through a brutal yet systematic process, the Custodes are born of singular attention, from gene seed that isn't replicated but elevated. Their training is not measured in years. It's measured in lifetimes. Some take decades to complete their shaping. And even then, many fail, because it isn't just about strength or speed. It's about becoming a being capable of carrying the weight of being the Emperor's shadow. There's an aura about the Custodes that unsettles even the most battle-hardened Astartes. They don't speak in bombastic tones or roar into battle with chainswords blazing. They don't wear skulls and purity seals like trophies. Their gold is not a show of wealth. It's a declaration, a symbol that says, "We were here before you, we are above you, and if necessary, we will destroy you." And that's not arrogance. It's fact. The way they move is different, too. Every custodian walks like someone who has already calculated the 5 different ways he could end you. There's a grace, a deadly stillness to them, like ancient statues that could awaken at any moment, and when they do, nothing survives. I once read an account from an Astartes sergeant who saw a single custodian clear a demon-infested bunker without breaking stride. No war cry, no fury, just surgical, deliberate death. And they aren't brothers. That's another thing that separates them. Space Marines have a fraternal bond. They fight for their chapter, their Primarch's legacy. The Custodes? They're solitary, even in formation. Their loyalty is only to the Emperor. Not to each other, not to the Imperium, and certainly not to any High Lord. It creates this sense of isolation around them. A custodian could stand guard beside another for 1,000 years and still feel alone. That's not a weakness. It's part of what makes them effective. They are minds sharpened to a point, bodies built for the singular act of defense through dominance. Even culturally, the Custodes are strange. They don't participate in the rituals and superstitions that define so much of the Adeptus Astartes. They don't kneel before icons or chant the litany of protection. They don't pray. They remember. They reflect. They observe. There's an almost philosophical stillness in them, a kind of inner silence that comes from having stared at the Golden Throne for millennia, watching the Imperium rot from within, yet doing nothing unless the threat touches the Emperor directly. That's the part that stings for many Imperial loyalists. The Custodes are not saviors. They won't answer distress calls. They won't save your world just because it's under attack. They've watched entire systems burn if the Emperor's safety was never in question. It's not cruelty. It's prioritization at the highest level. Their code is alien to most humans, even to other Imperials. And that's by design. Because to truly protect the master of mankind, you have to stand apart from mankind. There's even a theory some fans have that the Custodes represent what the Emperor wanted humanity to become. Not in form, perhaps, but in purpose. Focused, self-disciplined, incorruptible. They're like a mirror held up to the rest of the Imperium, showing what could have been and what will likely never be. That's part of what makes them so haunting. They are perfection in a decaying galaxy, and they know it. When the Custodes do act, it's like the wrath of a dormant god. Not many have seen it, but those who have described it as something terrifyingly precise. No wasted movement, no overkill. Just the exact amount of force necessary to remove a threat, and then silence again. It's hard to even call it war. It's execution. Calculated, inevitable, and cold. And yet, they aren't machines. That's what makes it more disturbing. They feel, they think. They're capable of deep introspection. But unlike the rest of the Imperium, they don't let emotions guide them. They process their thoughts like ancient philosophers with the strength of titans. Imagine a mind that's watched the Imperium rise and crumble, watched 10,000 years of suffering and incompetence, and still believes in only one thing: his will. They are watchers, yes, but also judges. And if the Imperium ever becomes more of a threat to the Emperor than a defense, many believe the Custodes won't hesitate to cleanse the rot. Not out of rebellion, but out of loyalty to something purer. It's terrifying to imagine that the most powerful warriors of the Imperium might one day turn against it, not out of heresy, but because their fidelity lies above all else. That's what makes them so different from Space Marines. The Astartes serve humanity. The Custodes serve only him. And in that terrifying purity, there is no room for mercy or compromise or anything that would dilute their purpose. They don't care for planets or legacies or victories. They care for the Emperor. And when they move, the galaxy trembles because it means something has gone very wrong. There's something deeply unsettling about the Sisters of Silence. Not because they're violent or grotesque, far from it. They're silent, elegant, almost ethereal in the way they move. But it's that silence that gets under your skin. A silence that isn't peaceful but absolute. A void, a hole in the warp. And in a galaxy where the warp is always there, whispering, watching, scratching at reality, that absence is terrifying. Most people in the Imperium have never even heard of the Sisters of Silence, let alone seen them. And that's not an accident. Their existence is meant to be forgotten, erased even, because their role isn't meant for the masses. They're the scalpel in a world full of hammers, but not even that fully captures what they are. The Sisters are nulls, blanks, anti-psychers, psychic black holes. Where a psyker is like a beacon screaming into the immaterium, a sister is the absence of a scream. A negative. A cold and unnatural silence that causes the warp to recoil. Psychers suffer in their presence. Some vomit, some collapse. The strongest ones weep like children. And those are the ones who survive. The psychological pressure they exert isn't something you can get used to. It's instinctual, primal. Being near one of them feels wrong, even if you don't understand why. Like the laws of nature are folding in on themselves. Like something that shouldn't exist is suddenly standing next to you. And yet, they do exist. Proudly. With heads held high and weapons drawn, not in hatred but in cold conviction. Their mission is simple in theory, but horrifying in practice. Hunt psychers. Seek out the cursed, the possessed, the uncontrolled, and eliminate them. They don't negotiate. They don't judge. If you're a threat to the Emperor because of what stirs in your soul, you're already dead. There's no redemption, no forgiveness, no last rites. Just a blade and silence. But the Sisters aren't monsters. That's the strange part. They're human, biologically at least. No superhuman strength, no gene forging like the Custodes or Astartes. Just steel will and a mind untouched by the warp. And that's exactly why they're feared. Because in a galaxy where everything is corrupted, compromised, or desperate, the Sisters of Silence walk like they're immune to all of it. Not out of arrogance, but because they are. Their bond with the Custodes is one of the most fascinating dynamics in the Imperium. On paper, they shouldn't work together. One is the Emperor's voice made flesh, a being of godlike power and divine purpose. The other is his silence, the absence of that power, a denial of the very foundation the Imperium is built on. But when they operate side by side, something eerie happens. They complement each other. The Custodes clear the path with brutal efficiency, while the Sisters drain the battlefield of psychic interference. Together, they're almost untouchable. A spear of golden perfection and a cloak of utter silence moving as one. There's a myth among some fan circles that Custodes actually find the Sisters unnerving, not because they're weak, but because they remind them of the Emperor's own contradictions. The Emperor was a being of immense psychic ability, yet surrounded himself with nulls. It's like watching a sun embrace the void. Some think it was his way of keeping himself grounded. Others believe the Sisters were always a fail-safe, a means to suppress or contain what even he couldn't fully control. Despite their proximity to power, the Sisters live lives of total detachment. They don't speak, literally. They communicate through a unique form of sign language called thoughtmark. It's fast, precise, and brutally efficient, just like them. And even among themselves, there's a reverent quiet. No shouting, no laughter, no singing, just mission after mission, kill after kill, death after death. And yet, there's a strange beauty in their devotion. They chose this path. Nulls aren't forcibly conscripted. They're found, trained, and offered a purpose in a galaxy that fears them. Many take it, not out of desperation, but because they understand what they are. It's easy to demonize them. It's also a mistake. The Sisters of Silence are not cruel. They're just not sentimental. When they kill, it's not personal. It's necessary. In a universe where one untrained psyker can doom a planet, their role isn't optional. It's salvation in a grim and thankless form. There's a haunting story I once read from a guard officer who saw a sister in action. A demon had erupted from the body of a sanctioned psyker during a warp storm. The unit was paralyzed with fear. Then she arrived. No backup, no words. Just this tall, silent figure in black and bronze. The demon howled as it sensed her, its body shrinking under her presence. She didn't scream or charge. She walked, and when she reached it, she simply cut. And that was it. Silence again. Fans often debate whether the sisters feel anything. Do they mourn? Do they remember? Do they dream? We'll probably never know. But there's something tragic about that. Because while the Custodes are remembered, honored, and feared, the sisters fade into history like ghosts. No statues, no oaths, just the mission. And in some ways, that makes their sacrifice even more profound. They are emptiness wielded with purpose. The silence that drowns screams, the black void that denies the demonic. And in a galaxy that never sleeps, never stops screaming, and never ceases to burn, the Sisters of Silence remind us that sometimes salvation doesn't come with the trumpet's call. Sometimes it comes on quiet feet, with a cold blade and no final words. The Inquisition is one of those parts of the Imperium that makes you pause when you start to understand what it really is. At first glance, it sounds like something out of a nightmare, an organization so powerful that it answers to no one, not even the High Lords, and has the authority to execute, torture, or obliterate entire planets based on a whisper of heresy. But once you dig deeper, once you see how the Inquisition works alongside entities like the Custodes and the Sisters of Silence, you begin to grasp that it isn't just power for power's sake. It's a last line of defense against threats that don't even have names. The Inquisition's wars are fought in whispers and shadows. There are no banners, no glory, no parades. Just data scrolls full of redacted names, unexplained mass burnings, and operatives who disappear into the dark never to return. And at the heart of it all are the Inquisitors, the ultimate agents of control, survival, and sometimes annihilation. They're not soldiers. They're not politicians. They're predators, philosophers with the power to unmake cities. And depending on which ordo they serve, their enemies could be heretics, aliens, or demons, or worse, ideas. The three most infamous branches, Ordo Hereticus, Ordo Malleus, and Ordo Xenos, each operate under their own logic, their own dread. The Hereticus are probably the most visible, at least in the popular imagination. They hunt witches, rogue psychers, apostates, and even imperial leaders who've strayed too far from the creed. Their work is brutal, and that's putting it lightly. They don't ask for proof, they are the proof. If an Inquisitor of the Hereticus says you're a heretic, then you are. And once they make that declaration, there is no trial, only execution. The Ordo Malleus, though, they deal with something far darker. They hunt demons. Not just the blood-crazed monstrosities that claw their way into reality during warp storms, but the subtle, whispering horrors that corrupt dreams and faith. These Inquisitors don't just deal with corrupted humans. They often become the only shield against entire warp breaches. Their methods are extreme. Many of them are sanctioned psychers themselves, and they are the ones most often seen calling on the Grey Knights, the only warriors trusted to face the demonic without succumbing. But sometimes, when even the Grey Knights aren't enough, they call upon the Custodes or request the presence of the Sisters of Silence to purge the corruption at the root. Then there's the Ordo Xenos, the Watchers of the Stars. Their mission is a paradox. They must study alien species in order to understand them, but they're sworn to exterminate them. They walk a razor's edge between knowledge and annihilation. While the Imperium screams about Xenos as if they were simple vermin, the Ordo Xenos knows better. They've seen what the Necrons really are. They've faced the insidious logic of the Tyranids. They've watched the Tau grow faster than anyone predicted. These Inquisitors wage cold wars in distant systems, manipulate governments, sow divisions among xenospecies, and sometimes even work with them, temporarily, just to delay extinction. What's especially eerie is how seamlessly these Ordos intersect with the Custodes and the Sisters of Silence when things get truly apocalyptic. It's not a common sight, not by any means, but when it happens, it's because something terrible is stirring. A High Inquisitor might petition the Senatorum Imperialis for assistance, and that petition could reach the Custodes. If they choose to respond, which they rarely do, it means they've judged the threat worthy of their presence. And that's usually when you know the situation is already spiraling out of control. There are whispers among certain circles that the Inquisition and the Custodes don't always get along. And it makes sense. The Custodes see themselves as above the petty infighting of imperial bureaucracy. To them, the Inquisition is necessary, but often misguided. There are even theories that custodians have executed Inquisitors in the past, not because of corruption, but because they acted in ways that endangered the Emperor's safety or dared to pry too deeply into secrets best left buried. And when a custodian makes that call, there's no appeal, and yet there is a kind of respect there, hidden beneath the tension. Because the Inquisition, for all its horror, fights the battles no one else even knows exist. They make impossible decisions in impossible situations. Do you let a hive world fall if it means you can lure out a greater demonic threat? Do you infect a rebel planet with a controlled virus to stop a tyrannid vanguard? These are not acts of evil. They're acts of grim necessity. And the Custodes, in their own cold logic, understand that. The Sisters of Silence often find themselves aligned with the Inquisition in a more direct way, especially with Ordo Malleus and Hereticus. Their null abilities make them ideal for purging rogue psychers, containing warp artifacts, or simply guarding Inquisitors who work too close to the edge of sanity. There's something chilling about watching a Sister of Silence stand guard behind an Inquisitor as they interrogate a chaos-warped prisoner. No emotion, no movement, just that psychic silence smothering everything around it like a shroud. The legion that forms when these forces unite isn't an official military structure. There's no sigil for it, no formal name. But fans sometimes call it the Emperor's Shadow Legion, the strike teams composed of Custodes, Sisters, and Inquisitors. They exist in the margins of war, deployed only when the stakes rise beyond comprehension. And when they move, history bends around them. Worlds vanish from records. Stars are blotted out, and all that remains is a footnote in a redacted archive. Classified threat neutralized. That's the terrifying beauty of the Inquisition's secret war. You'll never hear about it. You'll never see it. But if you're still breathing, still sane, still unburned by the warp, it's because somewhere, in some forgotten corner of the galaxy, a custodian drove his spear through something nameless while a Sister of Silence closed the door on reality, and an Inquisitor watched it all, took notes, and erased every trace it ever happened. Let's talk about the name itself. The Emperor's Legion. It sounds official, doesn't it? Like some towering institution with battle banners, rank structure, and high command. But that's the thing. It isn't. Or at least, not in any way that can be found in Imperial records. There's no formal codex, no administratum seal, no standing orders or deployments listed in campaign ledgers. If you ask a scribe of the Officio Logistorum, they'll tell you the Emperor's Legion doesn't exist. But the people who've seen them? The soldiers who caught a glimpse of gold, black, and silence moving together before an entire city block vanished in flame? They'll tell you something very different. The Emperor's Legion is a ghost story, but it's one told by generals and inquisitors, not by children. It's a name whispered behind closed doors when something too clean happens, when heretic cults vanish overnight without explanation, when demon incursions are suppressed so completely that even the memory of them fades. There's no unit insignia, no heraldry, just the unmistakable presence of those who serve the throne in ways too dangerous, too sensitive, or too dark to ever be recorded. Some fans believe the term Emperor's Legion is more of a code word, a term used to justify actions that must be carried out with deniability. Think about it. If a custodian, a sister of silence, and an inquisitor walk onto a battlefield together, who gives the orders? Who writes the report? Who's authorized to even know that such a group existed in that place and time? The answer is usually no one. And in the Imperium, when no one can be held accountable, myths are born. But the idea behind it, that there's a loose alliance of these three forces that activates when certain threats arise, it feels real. Not because we've seen documents confirming it, but because the actions attributed to them leave scars. You find them in the aftermaths. Entire sectors quarantined without explanation, entire populations mind-wiped, entire planets marked as destroyed in navigational error. And yet the survivors, those few who slipped through the cracks, speak of golden giants, silent women in bronze, and inquisitors whose eyes glowed with the light of 1,000 truths no human should carry. What makes the idea of the Emperor's Legion so compelling is that it shouldn't exist. The Custodes are not part of the military. The Sisters don't belong to a standard command structure. The Inquisition acts independently. There's no chain of command linking them. And yet, time and time again, they do operate together. Not frequently, not predictably. But when they do, it's with a precision that suggests some form of coordination beyond accident or desperation. Some speculate that there's a hidden council, maybe not even human, that determines when the Legion is activated. Others believe it's more fluid, that each member knows when the stakes are high enough to cooperate, and they act based on a shared understanding rather than orders. Imagine a threat so dire that it breaks the usual silos. A demon prince rising from an ancient artifact buried beneath Terra's crust. A Necron protocol activating in the heart of Mars. A psyker so powerful she warps reality in her sleep. In moments like those, the old rules vanish, and in their place steps the Legion. Others think it's more sinister, that the Emperor's Legion is a cover story. That it's used to erase failures, black ops gone wrong, or experiments that escaped containment. In this version, the Custodes don't just protect the Emperor, they clean up his mistakes. The Sisters don't just neutralize psychers, they erase psychic horrors born in secret labs. And the Inquisition, they hold the leash, or at least try to, documenting just enough to keep the Imperium from fracturing under the weight of what's been buried. There's a chilling theory that floats around old data hives, buried in corrupted text files and secondhand testimonies. It suggests that the Emperor's Legion isn't a response team, it's a ritual. A convergence of the throne's most loyal instruments, drawn together by fate, the warp, or the Emperor's own dormant will. That when they appear, it's not a tactical decision, it's a manifestation. A psychic knot being pulled tight by the hands of something older than the Imperium itself. Of course, there's no way to prove any of this, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the Emperor's Legion is meant to be unknowable, because if you did understand what it really was, if you could trace its movements, see its members, know its purpose, you'd already be too close. Too much of a risk. You'd need to be silenced, purged, forgotten. There's a kind of poetry to that, honestly. In a galaxy obsessed with control, the Emperor's Legion is chaos disguised as order, a myth built on facts too dangerous to record. It operates in the blind spots of bureaucracy, thrives in the gaps between doctrines, and survives because no one can confirm it ever existed. And yet, every now and then, someone sees the glint of auramite, feels the crushing stillness of a null field, or hears the low growl of an Inquisitor's vox whispering a death sentence. And in that moment, the myth becomes very, very real. The Emperor's Legion might not have banners or a place in the Codex, but its shadow stretches across the stars. And when it moves, even the darkness takes a step back. When a custodian leaves Terra, the galaxy shudders. It's not like when a Space Marine chapter receives orders and mobilizes for a crusade. It's not even like when an Inquisitor triggers an exterminatus. No, when a member of the Adeptus Custodes steps away from the throne, it means something has gone terribly wrong. So wrong that even their sacred duty to stand vigil over the master of mankind must be momentarily set aside. That's not a decision made lightly. It's a crack in the sacred order of the Imperium, and it speaks to just how catastrophic the situation has to be. For 10,000 years, the Custodians have stood sentinel over the Golden Throne. Their vigilance is absolute, their loyalty unquestionable. So the idea that any of them would choose to leave the Imperial Palace sounds insane at first. And yet it happens. Not often, not openly. But when the stars align in the worst possible way, the Wardens of the Emperor act. The internal code of the Custodes, something fans often call the Aegis Protocol, though no official source names it that, guides when and how they may act beyond Terra. It's not a hierarchy of command like the Astra Militarum. It's not a spiritual code like the Adeptus Sororitas. It's something deeper. It's philosophy turned into discipline, shaped by millennia of silent watchfulness and impossible burdens. Each custodian must personally judge the necessity of departure, and when they choose to leave, they are alone. No one orders them. No one recalls them. Their conscience and their oath are one and the same. Some of the most haunting stories in the lore come from these rare deployments. There's the tale of Shield Captain Tivolin, who left Terra after discovering a series of encoded transmissions from a rogue Mechanicus sect attempting to access a pre-Imperial vault hidden on a dead moon in the Ghoul stars. He arrived too late to stop them from unlocking it, but not too late to seal what they had unleashed. According to fragmentary records, he fought alone for 11 days against a being that fed on time itself. When the Inquisition arrived, the moon was gone, only void, and a single golden figure floating in zero gravity, watching. Then there's the infamous mission of the Tribune, known only as Dithorian the Pale. Legends claim he walked into the Black Library itself, not with violence, but with purpose. Some Eldar Farseers claim he was searching for a name, a single word that had been whispered into the dreams of the High Lords of Terra. Whatever he found there, no one knows. But when he returned, silent and scorched, he gave a single warning. The next time he speaks, it will not be a whisper. After that, Dithorian disappeared. Some say he was recalled to Terra. Others believe he is still out there hunting that voice. But what truly drives these warriors to leave the Emperor's side? It isn't ambition. They don't seek glory. It isn't compassion either. The Custodes are not moved by the cries of dying worlds unless those cries echo with a threat to the throne itself. What compels them is necessity. When something threatens the Emperor, be it a Xenos incursion with knowledge of Old Night, a demon cult that has found a crack in reality too close to Terra, or even a rogue Inquisitor playing with forbidden archaeotech, the Custodes move. Not to fight wars, not to save lives, but to eliminate threats that others don't even recognize. There's a theory some fans share, mostly in private threads and redacted lore forums, that custodians on these external missions don't act as agents of the Imperium at all. They become something closer to what the Emperor intended in the Unification Wars, autonomous enforcers of his vision, unsullied by religion, bureaucracy, or corruption. When they leave Terra, they carry the Emperor's will, not the Ecclesiarchy's interpretation of it. And that's part of what makes them so terrifying to those they encounter, because they are not bound by the laws of the Imperium. They are the law, in its purest and most primal form. Even their choice of weaponry shifts on these missions. The iconic Guardian spears give way to relics, proto-weapons, forgotten power fields, even forbidden psi-null devices, tools so dangerous that no one else is trusted to wield them. Their armor may be darkened, marked with runes that don't appear in any Imperial database. They change because the galaxy they enter beyond Terra requires a different kind of warfare, one shaped by silence, precision, and finality. One of the most compelling pieces of speculation I've ever seen was a theory that the Custodes don't report their off-world missions to the High Lords at all, that when they act, the Lords are informed after the fact, if at all. Think about what that implies, that the most powerful individuals in the Imperium might be operating in the dark while the Emperor's personal guards act without their knowledge. It raises the question of whether the Custodes see themselves as protectors of the Imperium or as watchers of it, ready to cut out the cancer if it grows too close to the throne. Even among loyalists, that's a deeply unsettling idea, because it means no one is truly safe, not even those who claim to speak for the Emperor. And that's the core truth behind every custodian mission beyond Terra. They don't just defend against external threats. They monitor internal decay. And when they detect rot, they don't send messages. They send judgment. The Custodes don't leave the Golden Throne because they want to. They do it because they must. Because sometimes the danger isn't at the gates. It's already inside. And when that happens, when the risk is too great, when the silence around the Emperor wavers, they rise, alone, unstoppable, and terrifyingly precise. The galaxy may never know they were there, but the warp always does, and it recoils. There's this assumption that the Sisters of Silence only exist to neutralize psychers in battle, like they're just blunt instruments of anti-psychic warfare. That image of them storming the front lines, nullifying enemy sorcerers while swinging their blades in utter silence, it's dramatic, but it barely scratches the surface. Because the truth, the deeper truth, is far more unsettling. The Sisters don't just fight. They hunt, and not always for the obvious enemy. Sometimes they're tracking a psyker who hasn't even awakened yet. Sometimes they're dispatched to locate something not even the Inquisition understands. And sometimes they're not sent. They volunteer. That's what makes them terrifying. They're not just reactive. They're proactive. What most don't realize is that the Sisters of Silence have an entire internal structure of intelligence and reconnaissance that rivals the Ordo Hereticus itself. They don't leave the convents unless there's purpose. Every movement is calculated, deliberate, and rooted in patterns that no conventional strategist can decipher. They move through the galaxy not like warriors, but like seekers. And what they seek isn't always alive. There's an idea among some fans that the Sisters operate on two levels. The visible level, the blade, the null field, the battlefield presence. And then there's the invisible level, the deep intelligence operations, the psychic cartography, the internal tracking of anomalous births across hive worlds. That's right, the Sisters monitor births. Specifically, they monitor for what some in the Scholastica Psychana call pre-warp resonance. Before a child even manifests psychic abilities, there are ripples, strange neurological pulses, subtle changes in the mother's hormonal balance, fluctuations in local warp tides. The Sisters detect these. That's when the real mission begins. No guns, no squads. Just a few silent figures inserted into slums or sanctuaries, watching. Sometimes they collect samples. Sometimes they just observe. But if the signals are confirmed, they act. And here's where it gets controversial, even among loyalists. Because the Sisters don't always bring these children to Terra. Sometimes they simply erase them. The idea that entire bloodlines can be ended before they even blossom into danger isn't propaganda. It's a whispered policy. And it's not driven by hatred, it's driven by necessity. In a galaxy where one uncontrolled psyker can unravel reality, the margin for error is zero. Then there's their work with psychic artifacts. Forbidden relics from the dark age of technology, alien relics from Eldar craft worlds, even fragments of fallen demons sealed in stasis fields. The Sisters are often dispatched to secure or destroy these items, not because they understand them, but because they nullify them. No other force can stand so close to these objects and remain unaffected. They become living vaults, their presence alone sterilizing the space around them from warp interference. I've seen accounts from explorator fleets where Mechanicus tech priests refused to enter certain chambers until a sister had walked through them first. Like a holy cleansing, their silence becomes a tool not just of suppression, but of interrogation. And I don't mean conventional questioning, I mean psychic resonance scans. By placing a sister near a suspect psyker, interrogators can watch for physical or psychological stress patterns without the chaos of warp echoes. It's clinical, almost surgical, And because the sisters speak only in Thoughtmark, the process feels alien, like watching ghosts dissect a soul. But it goes even deeper than that. There are long-standing theories among fan circles that the sisters aren't just eradicators of psychic threats. They are also watchers of the Inquisition itself, particularly the Ordo Malleus. Think about it. Inquisitors wielding forbidden psychic power, sometimes walking the fine edge of demonology. Who watches them? Who ensures they don't cross the line? The Ecclesiarchy certainly doesn't have that reach. But the sisters? They walk beside these Inquisitors, stand behind them in silence. And if one of them ever did stray too far, would anyone be surprised if the sister at their side quietly ended them? There's a famous, unconfirmed report from the Calixis sector about an Inquisitor who vanished during a demonic incursion on Iacanthos. His last known location was deep in the forest, escorted by 2 sisters. When reinforcements arrived, there was nothing left of him, just a single scorched rosette, no report filed, no official cause of death, just silence. Some say he was lost in the warp, others think he went rogue. But those who know the sisters believe the truth is simpler. He went too far, and they ended him. Another lesser-known role they serve is within what's sometimes called the Black Reconciliation. Secret experiments involving psychers too valuable to destroy, but too dangerous to unleash. Here, the sisters act as both jailers and guardians. Some are stationed permanently on orbiting penitentiaries, where they stand as the final line of containment. If a psyker breaks through Geller fields or bursts out of containment, the sisters don't just neutralize the threat. They ensure there's nothing left to study. Some fans believe they even assist in psychic weapon testing, their null fields used to shape the parameters of war gear still in classified development. And here's the part that hits hardest. Many sisters have volunteered for the most hopeless assignments. Silent observation posts on dead moons orbiting warp anomalies. Recon missions into ruins where the laws of time no longer apply. Escort missions through the Noctis Labyrinth itself. These aren't just dutiful warriors. They're zealots, yes, but not in the way we normally think of faith. Their belief isn't in dogma. It's in function, in necessity, in a kind of clarity that comes from knowing you must exist, even if everyone hates you for it. They're not just fighting for humanity's safety. They're sculpting the warp landscape. Their movements, their choices, their eradications, each one shapes the future in ways we can barely perceive. And they do it with no glory, no songs, no faces remembered. The Sisters of Silence aren't just hunting threats. They are actively removing possibilities, futures that might have led to damnation, lives that might have triggered apocalypse. They walk a path no one else can even see, and they do it in perfect, unrelenting silence. There's a strange arrogance that lingers in the Inquisition, a belief, almost universally held among its agents, that they are the highest authority in the Imperium. And to be fair, in almost every case, they are. An Inquisitor can command armies, override governors, execute cardinals, and even silence Astartes if the threat justifies it. Their mandate comes not from tradition or dogma, but from necessity. The Imperium needs people like them to function in a galaxy built on betrayal, mutation, heresy, and worse. But there's one force even they tread carefully around, one force they don't command, no matter how loudly they speak, the Adeptus Custodes. And this is where things get complicated. Because when the Inquisition and the Custodes meet on the same battlefield, literal or ideological, it becomes a quiet war of dominance, where every gesture and word is weighted with centuries of precedent and unspoken threat. There's a recorded instance, though heavily redacted, of an Ordo Malleus Lord Inquisitor attempting to conscript a small unit of custodians during a large-scale demonic incursion on the edge of the Segmentum Obscurus. The situation was dire. A minor warp rift had bloomed into a full breach, and the Grey Knights were already stretched thin. The Inquisitor demanded the custodians reinforce the line. The custodians refused. Not out of insubordination, but because their own analysis had revealed a deeper, more insidious presence at the site, something not even the Inquisitor was aware of. The custodians had been dispatched for a singular objective, not to hold the line, but to eliminate a specific entity that had manipulated the breach into existence. Their mission wasn't tactical, it was surgical. Tension rose. Vox channels were cut. The Inquisitor threatened sanction. The custodians gave no response. They simply moved. Within hours, the target had been neutralized and the warp rift sealed. The Inquisitor survived but was later removed from her post. Officially, it was due to judgment compromised by warp exposure. But many believe the Custodes reported her directly to Terra, and that was that. Who controls whom? That question haunts the upper echelons of the Imperium. Technically, no one controls the Custodes, not the High Lords, not the Ecclesiarchy, certainly not the Inquisition. They act on the will of the Emperor, interpreted through their own internal codes. And yet, there are moments, rare but documented, where custodians accompany Inquisitors into war zones, clearly taking directives. Does that mean they're subordinate? Not exactly. It's more like a temporary alignment, a mutual recognition that this particular threat requires cooperation, not command. There's a fan theory I've always found compelling, that every custodian who travels with an Inquisitor does so with a secondary mission: to watch them. Think about it. Inquisitors operate at the edge of what's permissible. Some of them flirt with forbidden knowledge. Some use sorcery or consort with Xenos tech, or make compromises no sane human would ever accept. What better way to ensure they don't fall completely than to assign a silent guardian who never blinks? Of course, not every Inquisitor is arrogant. Some recognize exactly what the Custodes represent, and they fear them. There's a recorded Vox transcript, leaked, then purged, where an Ordo Hereticus interrogator describes standing before a custodian who had traveled with his superior. The custodian never spoke, never moved, just watched. And when the mission ended, the Inquisitor submitted his resignation. He wasn't there to assist, the interrogator wrote. He was there to judge, and I think he found something wanting. There are also stories where the relationship flips, where Inquisitors threaten Custodes, usually in political arenas or when operating in sectors far from Terra. In one such case, an Ordo Xenos Inquisitor uncovered a series of pre-Imperial vaults beneath an agri-world showing signs of Necron infestation. A custodian shield captain appeared days later, declaring the vault to be under custodian jurisdiction. The Inquisitor, citing her absolute authority, blocked access. The standoff lasted hours. In the end, the custodian relented, but not without leaving a coded warning on the Inquisitor's ship. Within weeks, her vessel suffered a critical malfunction en route to Terra. No survivors, no investigation. Who fears who more? That's hard to say. The Inquisition fears what the Custodes can do. The Custodes fear why they might have to do it. Because when a custodian turns his weapon on an Inquisitor, it means something has gone irreparably wrong. It means loyalty has failed. It means the last safeguard has been triggered. There's a story, likely apocryphal, about a custodian who once attended a High Lord summit where an Inquisitor made an aggressive case for restructuring the Adeptus Ministorum. The custodian said nothing. But after the meeting, the Inquisitor's personal files were erased from every database across Terra. Even the rosette tied to their name no longer had access clearance. Within hours, their name was gone. Not excommunicated. Erased. That kind of erasure doesn't happen unless the Custodes decide you no longer serve the Emperor's interests. Some say this is why the Inquisition often recruits from outside its own ranks when psychic nulls are needed. They'll go to the Sisters of Silence rather than request a custodian. Because the Sisters don't judge, they execute. The Custodes, they decide. And no one wants to be in the path of that decision. At the end of the day, it's not about power, it's about perspective. The Inquisition sees itself as the Imperium's immune system, fighting infection wherever it appears. But the Custodes are something else entirely. They're not part of the body. They're not even part of the machinery. They're the blade hovering above it all, ready to sever anything, even vital organs, if it means preserving the core. And the Inquisition knows that, which is why they whisper when the Custodes are near, which is why they never shout orders, because deep down, they understand the truth. The Custodes don't answer to them. They answer to something far more terrifying, an emperor who no longer speaks, but whose silence is still absolute. There are threats in the galaxy that don't have names, not because they're secret, but because language fails to describe them. You can't brief a strike team on something that doesn't obey physics. You can't draw tactical maps of nightmares. And that's exactly what the Emperor's Legion is sometimes sent to confront, not armies or fleets, but phenomena. Realities twisted into weapons, echoes of ancient sins, sentient artifacts that rewrite thought, or creatures so fundamentally wrong that even demons recoil from them. These aren't just enemies of the Imperium, they're enemies of reality itself. The Imperium has a word for these anomalies: unclassifiable. It shows up in records that are immediately sealed, assigned alpha-level clearance, and usually followed by an execution order for everyone who read them. But if you dig deep enough into redacted scraps and corrupted machine prayers, patterns begin to emerge. Every now and then, Custodes, Sisters of Silence, and Inquisitors converge on these moments. And when they do, the Emperor's Legion isn't there to win a battle. They're there to end something before it can become a war. There's a haunting story, part battlefield report, part urban legend, about a forgotten planet known only as Kairos 7. It doesn't appear on any star map now. It was once a forge world deep in the Segmentum Pacificus. Everything went dark in under a week. No warp storm, no invasion, just silence. When the Adeptus Mechanicus dispatched a recovery fleet, all they found was a dead star and debris scattered like bone fragments. But for a few seconds, before transmission failure, an explorator frigate reported a structure in orbit. Golden figures, a circle of silent warriors, and one black-robed shape holding something wrapped in chains that shimmered against the laws of light. No explanation was ever given. Kairos 7 was declared non-existent, but those who study forbidden history say a demon engine unlike any known pattern had begun to awaken there, one that fed not on souls, but on identity itself. Then there's the legend of the Cage of Silence, an artifact rumored to predate the Imperium, buried deep within the crust of a quarantined moon near the Maelstrom. The cage doesn't emit psychic energy, it devours it. When psychers approach, their powers vanish, not suppressed, not nullified, but gone. Erased from the warp as if they had never existed. A joint operation involving the Sisters and an Ordo Malleus task force was launched. No record of its outcome exists, except a single phrase scrawled in an archived astropathic fragment. It remembers who you were. Some believe the Custodes recovered it. Others think they destroyed it. But the moon's orbit shifted unnaturally soon after, as if something massive had been moved or buried deeper. These aren't isolated events. They're glimpses into a war fought in places where even time loses meaning, in zones of spatial collapse, where buildings loop endlessly, or where every reflection shows a different version of the observer. In these hellish pockets, the Emperor's Legion becomes something closer to a containment unit than a military force. Their presence isn't about overwhelming firepower, it's about enforcing reality, holding it together long enough to destroy the cancer. What do they hunt? Theories abound. One of the most persistent is the existence of proto-gods, entities that are not yet chaos gods, but could become them. Imagine an idea, an emotion, a thought, gaining mass, form, and hunger. Not warp beings, not demons, but seeds of them. The Custodes and Sisters are sometimes dispatched to ensure those seeds never germinate. Entire cultures have been purged not for worshipping chaos, but for believing too cleverly, for creating myths too resonant, stories too potent. because belief feeds the warp. And sometimes a tale whispered on too many worlds is enough to attract the attention of something ancient. There are also the weapons. Oh, Emperor, the weapons. Items that don't follow the laws of known science, bolt guns that fire memories instead of shells, swords that drink the minds of those they cut, staves that rewrite loyalties with a single touch. Many of these come from the dark age of technology. Some are Xenos. A few may be older still. The Inquisition wants to study them. The Mechanicus wants to use them. But the Custodes, they destroy them. No hesitation, no reverence. To them, a weapon that cannot be understood is a weapon that cannot be controlled. And that is enough. There's even talk of a place called the Unspoken Vault, a location known only to the highest custodian tribunes and a few archmagos of the Noctilith Conclave. Supposedly, this is where the worst of the worst is sealed. Relics, creatures, even concepts too dangerous to be left in reality. Some believe the vault isn't on any planet, but floating in null space, accessible only through a ritual performed in the Emperor's name. Others think it's beneath the Imperial Palace itself, layered in psychic dampeners and guarded by sisters who have never spoken to another living soul. If true, then the Legion isn't just a strike force. It's the maintenance crew for a prison holding the ideas that could end the Imperium. You hear about these things only in hushed tones, anomalies, events, echoes. But the consistency is there. The signs, the silence, the gold, the black. And always, always, the aftermath scrubbed from history. And yet, if you look hard enough, there are fingerprints. Just enough to hint that the Emperor's Legion doesn't just kill monsters. They hunt possibility. They erase futures where horror wins. That's what keeps me up sometimes. The idea that there are horrors so vast, so incomprehensible, that even the Chaos Gods fear them. That maybe the demons we know are just the surface, and below them swim the things that made them afraid. And when those things stir, the Emperor sends not armies, but symbols. Living instruments, the Legion, and they move not to fight, but to unmake. There's a strange kind of fear that comes with silence in the Imperium, especially when it wraps around something that should be too loud to miss. A Custodes strike team, a full detachment of Sisters of Silence. These aren't forces that vanish quietly. When they move, they bend reality, command attention, shift entire battlefronts by their presence alone. So when they disappear, when records stop, when transmissions fade, when names are deleted and only redacted ciphers remain, it leaves a wound in the tapestry of Imperial history. A hole no one dares fill, not because they can't, but because they've been told not to. There are entire vaults in the Officio Medicae, the Ordo Malleus, and even the Adeptus Custodes themselves marked with nothing more than black seals and strings of meaningless code. No titles, no names, just dates, vague coordinates, and the occasional phrase like Operation Solum Nihil or Asset Nullified prior to containment. Some of these files are so heavily sealed that even Inquisitors with the highest clearance can't access them. And those who try? Well, there's a reason the term Black Dossier sends chills even through seasoned Lords of Terra. One of the most notorious cases, whispered about in long-forgotten Mechanicus enclaves, is the disappearance of Praetorian Detachment Eon 3. The only reason we even know about them is because of a half-corrupted transmission discovered on an abandoned Vox relay station in the outer edges of the Halo stars. The message references a Custodes-led team dispatched to investigate a silent Forge world, one that had ceased all output despite no signs of external assault. The team included 5 custodians, a contingent of 15 sisters, and several inquisitorial aides. They made planetfall. The last transmission simply read, "We are inside the mirror. It is thinking about us." Then nothing. Not even static. The world was later declared a navigational hazard and removed from Imperial charts. There's also the matter of Convent Nihila, an entire Sisters of Silence outpost hidden within the asteroid clusters of the Cadian Fringe. Officially, it never existed. But in the wake of the 13th Black Crusade, fragments of data logs were found embedded in recovered Adeptus Mechanicus wreckage. Those logs referenced null pattern Conventum Null 07, a station devoted not to war, but to studying the long-term effects of psychic suppression on warp-scarred environments. The last log entry was chilling in its simplicity. Subject 328 achieved cognitive silence, then the others followed. There were no survivors. And yet, the station showed no signs of damage. The sisters simply stopped. One of the darkest fan theories centers on what some call the Lost Column, a Custodes detachment rumored to have entered the webway without authorization, chasing something described only as a resonant anomaly. The webway, as everyone knows, is dangerous even to those who understand its structure, and the Custodes, by nature, do not trust it. But the story goes that the anomaly had been spotted moving through webway routes connected to ancient Terran vaults. The Custodes pursued it. What happened after is unclear. Some say the detachment was torn apart by temporal storms. Others believe they found something meant to remain hidden. What's unsettling is that, following their disappearance, the Custodian Guard began sealing off ancient tunnels beneath the Imperial Palace, structures thought long abandoned. Quietly, without explanation. Then there's the strange incident surrounding Segmentum Obscurus, where an Inquisitor reportedly tried to access a series of ghost entries in the Astronomican records, entries with no source, no coordinates, but tied to emergency warp beacons activated from a supposedly destroyed battlecruiser registered to the Silent Order. Every attempt to trace the signal resulted in psychers suffering aneurysms or seizure. The Inquisitor was found dead days later, apparently having suffocated on ink while attempting to transcribe a dream. The dream reportedly ended with the phrase, "The sisters guard not the Emperor's enemies, but what they become." You begin to understand as you follow these threads that these disappearances aren't about tactical losses or failed missions. They're erasures, cleansings, sometimes not even of personnel, but of knowledge. Entire expeditions vanish because of what they learned, not because they were defeated, but because they breached something meant to stay locked. And that's when the Emperor's Legion becomes terrifying, not as warriors, but as silencers. Some fan circles believe there's a protocol, a final tier command issued when an operation crosses a boundary no one was meant to even know existed. They call it the Last Order. It's said to trigger when an individual, not necessarily an enemy, but even a loyal Imperial servant, touches knowledge or artifacts that risk destabilizing the spiritual fabric of the Imperium. In these moments, the Emperor's Legion doesn't fight a war. They erase a record. Entire cities glassed, archives burned, populations memory wiped by sanctioned psychers or wiped out entirely. And when someone asks what happened, the answer is always the same. Clerical error, radiation leak, sector instability. Even locations become black zones. The vaults of Orison, the sixth moon of Thernax, the Null Cathedral beneath the Ganymedean Waste. Places that aren't just off-limits, they're removed from the map. Not abandoned, not quarantined, forgotten. And when someone dares speak of them, they find themselves being watched, not by the Arbites or even the Inquisition, but by a single figure in gold or a silent sister standing perfectly still outside their quarters. That's the power of the black dossiers. They aren't just censored reports. They're warnings, signals that something was seen, something was touched, and it changed everything. And whatever that thing was, it was never meant to be real. But for a brief, horrific moment, it was. And someone had to go in and bury it before it could become permanent. And so, the Emperor's Legion moves in silence, not just across battlefields, but across memory, across history itself. Custodians, sisters, inquisitors, shadows sent not to fight, but to unwrite, to delete, to ensure the Imperium remains intact, even if that means cutting out parts of its own soul. And if they vanish in the process. No monuments, no names, just a closed file, a black seal, and a note that simply reads, "Action concluded. No further review necessary." There's something deeply wrong with the fact that almost no one in the Imperium knows this war exists. Not just your average citizen or hive-ganger, but even many planetary governors, regimental commanders, and lower-tier inquisitors have no idea it's happening. And that's not an accident. It's not ignorance born of distance or distraction. It's design, a calculated silence, an engineered absence. Because to acknowledge this war, the one fought by the Custodes, the Sisters of Silence, and the Inquisition's darkest agents, is to admit that the Imperium is always teetering on the edge of annihilation by threats it can't explain, let alone defeat with conventional means. This isn't just about keeping secrets, it's about maintaining the illusion of control. The Imperium is a machine held together by belief, ritual, and fear. The cult imperialis depends on structure, certainty, the idea that everything is known and accounted for in the Emperor's plan. But what if that plan includes things so dangerous they can't be named? What if the Emperor's own elite are constantly suppressing realities that would shatter the minds of even the most faithful? That kind of knowledge would burn the entire ecclesiarchy to the ground. It's easier then to pretend, to build statues and cathedrals, to tell stories about glorious victories and martyrdom. Meanwhile, somewhere in the void, a custodian is impaling a creature that should not exist. A sister is erasing the last traces of a psyker whose dreams could unravel time. An inquisitor is rewriting history, literally, so that no one remembers what almost broke through. That's the real war, and it happens without ceremony, without acknowledgement. Because the moment you admit it's happening, you open the door just wide enough for fear to slip in. There are those who've tried to speak, astropaths who caught glimpses of these hidden conflicts and tried to warn others, only to be silenced by sudden malfunctions or mysterious seizures. Scholars who uncovered inconsistencies in official records and started asking the wrong questions. Entire research stations that disappeared after sending just one encrypted message. It's not just chaos, it's something else. And what's terrifying is that these cases aren't even denied. They're erased, not covered up, unwritten. People vanish not because they're wrong, but because they're right. Because the truth they touched was radioactive. Because the very act of knowing made them a liability to the psychic and spiritual fabric of the Imperium. In a universe held together by belief, doubt is heresy. And so, the Legion fights not just monsters, but knowledge itself. They make sure no one sees what must not be seen. And if someone does, they make sure no one remembers. There's a theory among fans that the war we're talking about, the real war, the one behind the veil, is as old as the Imperium itself. That it didn't begin with the heresy, or the Great Crusade, or even the Unification Wars. It began the moment the Emperor realized that humanity would never be ready for what's really out there. So he built more than armies. He built a shadow framework, the Custodes, the Sisters, the Inquisition, not to fight others, but to protect humanity from the things it isn't allowed to become. And that's why the Imperium doesn't talk about this war, because doing so would crack the illusion of invincibility. It would reveal that even the most faithful don't really understand the stakes. That the Emperor's most trusted warriors don't just defend us from the enemy, but from the truth. And that's too much for most people to bear. Even the High Lords walk carefully around this knowledge. Not because they're cowards, but because they know. They've read the files, seen the redacted names, heard the rumors. They've stood in the presence of a custodian who doesn't explain, doesn't ask permission, doesn't need to. They've watched a Sister of Silence erase a psychic echo from a cathedral and then walk away like it was never there. They know that acknowledging this war would shake the foundations of the Imperium, and maybe even the Astronomicon itself. And the Inquisition? They don't share this war because they can't. Even among their own, the danger of contamination is too high. If you tell an acolyte about a warp entity that eats prayers, and that acolyte mentions it to a priest, and that priest preaches against it, Suddenly that entity exists in the minds of millions. It becomes realer. That's how the warp works. Belief shapes it. Knowledge feeds it. And that's why silence is sometimes the only weapon. There's something beautiful and tragic in that. The idea that the people of the Imperium live their lives in blissful ignorance, never knowing that their reality is being pruned, corrected, and cleansed by unseen hands. That while they chant litanies and raise shrines, others are fighting wars in dimensions they'll never understand. And all of it so they can sleep, pray, and serve without fear. That's what makes the Emperor's Legion so important and so lonely. Because they can never be thanked, never be known, never be remembered. If they do their job right, history forgets them. If they fail, the galaxy burns. It's a burden few could bear. But they do. Silently, relentlessly, for him. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. Not all wars are fought for glory. Some are fought so others never have to know they happened at all. So now we reach the part where most stories would tie everything together. Maybe we'd say that the Custodes, the Sisters of Silence, and the Inquisition form a perfect team. Maybe we'd celebrate the efficiency of the Emperor's Legion as this elite force, unified in purpose, sworn in harmony to defend mankind from the shadows. But that would be a lie. They are not allies, not really. They're not built on unity. They're not a chain of command or a brotherhood. They're a tension, finely tuned, razor-edged, and always on the verge of snapping. The Emperor's Legion isn't a banner. It's a balance of fear. Each of these factions is terrifying on its own. The Custodes are the Emperor's wrath sculpted into golden perfection. The Sisters are living silences, nulls in a world that bleeds psychic noise. The Inquisition is the burning spear of authority, ready to purge the galaxy of anything, even truth itself. But together, they don't form a harmony. They form a cold detente, a coexistence based on shared necessity, not trust. They move together when they must, and only then, because each of them knows exactly what the others are capable of. That's not camaraderie. That's mutually assured destruction on a spiritual level. Some fans describe it like a loaded gun balanced on a needlepoint. The Custodes don't obey the Inquisition, they tolerate them. The Sisters of Silence don't serve the Inquisitors, they watch them, ready to silence them permanently if they stray too close to forbidden power. And the Inquisition, well, they don't command either of the others. But they do fear them, deeply, because they know that if they ever lose control, if even one Inquisitor goes too far, there will be no trial, no tribunal. There will just be golden footsteps in the void, and then nothing. But that's also what makes this trio so effective. Because they're not bound by loyalty, they're bound by consequence, by the weight of what they're each trying to prevent. The Custodes fear the Imperium's rot. The Sisters fear the warp's whisper. The Inquisition fears everything, and that tension forces precision. No one acts carelessly when every action could provoke retaliation from a being who can kill you before you blink. They act like chess masters, not warriors. Every move planned, calculated, measured. So is the Emperor's Legion a phantom? Maybe. It's not listed in any codex. It has no standing regiments, no insignia, no glory. It's a name whispered in corridors and erased from records. It's the silence behind the screams, the shadow behind the light. It's the footnote in history that keeps entire civilizations alive without their knowledge. But a phantom doesn't bleed. And the Custodes do bleed, rarely but meaningfully. The Sisters walk into hells that no one will ever name. The Inquisition sacrifices souls by the billions to preserve a future no one will thank them for. That's not fiction. That's a hidden war. And it's real. I think the most haunting idea I've ever come across in fan discussions is that the Emperor designed it this way. That he didn't want a clean alliance. He wanted this tension. This perpetual standoff between his deadliest agents. Because a balance of fear is harder to corrupt. It forces clarity. If any one faction overreaches, the others correct. If anyone force breaks the rules, the others purge. It's brutal. But in a galaxy where corruption flows like water and heresy can bloom from love, maybe brutality is the only way to survive. And maybe that's what makes the Emperor's Legion, whatever it actually is, so vital. It's not about unity. It's about protection through paradox. Warriors who oppose each other as often as they cooperate. Agents who don't trust each other but will still die together in silence to kill something that shouldn't exist. It's a machine made of contradictions, and somehow it works. So, if you ever hear someone say the Emperor's Legion doesn't exist, don't argue. Just nod, because that's the point. It's not supposed to exist in the way you think. It's not a chapter or an order or a temple. It's a response, a reflex, a whispered invocation made real by need, not decree. And if you ever see gold, black, and inquisitorial red moving together, run. Because something's wrong. And if they're there, it means it's already too late for everyone else. If this kind of hidden war fascinates you like it does me, if you want to dig deeper into the parts of Warhammer 40K that no one wants to admit are real, then stay with us. There's so much more beneath the surface of the Imperium. So many truths buried in silence, in fear, and fire. And if you're brave enough to keep looking into the abyss, hit that subscribe button, because the abyss is looking back, and we're going in together.